Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session. Really excited to see you all. And also, just in the beginning, want to remind you that we have a chat option here. So if you have any questions throughout the session, feel free to post them in this chat. We'll be really glad to answer them. So the topic of today's session is going to be building blockchain product with more than 100 million in revenue. And I would say that this goal is pretty ambitious, and throughout the talk, I'll try to break down how we can actually achieve that. And we will go through different levers and different components of launching that successful product, from a narrative, technology, different design choices, market, and any other things that can be important. And one thing I want to emphasize, that today's talk is pretty relevant to almost everyone who is building something in Web3, meaning the internet built on top of blockchain technology, either investing in a space or joining a startup or founding a startup itself, or being a technical directors working on marketing incentives. Everything is pretty interrelated. So let's start today's session. And the first thing I want to tell you, why should I even talk about it today? So my name is Max, and over the last several years, I've been basically living in Web3. This has been my passion and the technology scope that I'm super interested about. And over this time, we have founded a company called Construct Tech. And with Construct, we've incubated and supported more than 50 different DeFi protocols with a cumulative total value locked of more than $1 billion. Regarding the metric of total value locked, we'll get back to it pretty soon if you're not familiar with it. But it's one of the most success metrics in Web3, alongside with fully diluted valuation and many more. So basically, throughout the journey, we work with a lot of different narratives. As you know, there are a lot of things happening in crypto space. There are things happening in GameFi, in real-world assets, transitioning to blockchain. There are a lot of exchanges, either centralized or decentralized. And we work with many of these narratives to understand how this market really works and how we can actually ship products that can generate revenue. Because over the time, maybe if you've been familiar with crypto for a while, you've seen such things as ICO era in 2017, and all the things coming previously were pretty speculation based. And all of the things were just targeted on acquiring investments. But now things have shifted differently, and now things are built differently in Web3. So the main priority now is to build something that is really has a product market fit, the value generation, the value accrual for users, and actually can be sustainable over a prolonged period of time. And that's why the topic of today's session is actually with such a big figure of revenue. That's why, because we want to really focus on revenue and sustainability of that product, not on speculation narratives. So in order to understand things more, I want to start with the similar structure. So first, we'll go through the blockchain trends evolution throughout the year period from 2021 to 2025. Then we will dive into the technological choice that you, as a person who enters Web3, either with a startup or investments, should know. Then we'll go into the architecture phase, what kind of decision and design decisions you can take, and what kind of a toolkit you have in Web3. And then we'll indulge in pretty specific business-oriented topics, which are really special to Web3. So probably many of you have worked for several years in Web2, and by Web2, by the way, I mean all the startups in the traditional sector, in finance, in healthcare, in construction, and so on. And in these sectors, business models and go-to-market are very different from what we have observed in Web3, in the centralized internet space. So that's why it's pretty important if you're entering the sector. So yeah, starting with the general evolution milestones, we can see that in 2021, the industry experienced a period we call DeFi summer. It's actually a second DeFi summer because the previous one was in 2020, and it was absolutely different. So during the summer in 2021, we have seen a rapid growth of DeFi protocols, and primarily EVM-based DeFi protocols, meaning protocols built on Ethereum, a one-main network. And over the time, we have also seen the rise and actually very quick fall of NFT narratives and metaverse, especially starting with Facebook rebranding into Meta, and all the other projects starting to create social universes, digital spaces in order to onboard internet users into the spaces called application in real life. It was purely marketing driven, and actually that kind of overbalance on a speculation and marketing driven narratives in crypto actually switched into the Black Swan events series of Black Swan events, if we can call it so. Actually leading with Terraform Labs and Terra blockchain, Luna token, and FTX exchange, if you have heard, one of the most and the biggest actually financial fraud in crypto history, wiping out billions of value from the landscape. After that, we can see that it. Sorry, guys, my phone got overheated. I think I'm ready to continue, but without the video recording. Sorry for that. Let's get back where we have started previously. So after the series of pretty strong turmoils that were happening across the blockchain sphere in 2022, actually, because of value got written out of the system and a lot of risks got exposed, the industry learned from that kind of insights, and got back into developing a year after. So right now, starting from 2024, we can see emergence of new ecosystems like Solana, for example, and we can see a lot of liquidity and interesting use cases happening on that kind of networks, alongside Ethereum, of course. But Ethereum is pretty slowly changing the dominance to other networks. So moreover, we can also see a lot of other emerging narratives. We can dive into it also a bit later. So right now, I want to show you the visual implication of the DeFi dynamics, which has been happening around this period. So as we told previously, in 2022, in November, we've seen the strongest, the peak, the all-time high of DeFi total value locked. So now, getting back to the spot parameter, by total value locked, in this context, we mean all the funds which are locked in the protocols across the ecosystem, across the DeFi ecosystem on different chains. This can be the deposits into lending and borrowing protocols. This can be liquidity providing tokens. This can be all the other matters and means of currencies locked in decentralized finding protocols. And that's why this metric's been pretty successful in determining the real traction and volumes happening in the space, and that's why we use it here. And this exact metric reached the all-time high in November 2021, and it was more than $178 billion, which was the absolute high amount. But after that, we've seen a lot of fluctuations and a lot of hacks and a lot of DeFi exploits, because by the time the industry achieved very high metrics, and after that, we've seen that a lot of protocol designs and economics specifically failed, partially the Terra case. We'll dive into the next slide. So after that big crashes in crypto, we've seen that a lot of protocols been very hesitant to relaunch and launch again. Venture capital has declined. The investments were getting slower and slower into the crypto industry, and that's why, as you can see from basically the second part of 2022 and up until the 2024, we can see relatively stable but pretty low activity in the networks. However, a lot of developments were going in the background, which is pretty positive to this industry. And another pretty interesting insight that we can state that before the turmoils and before this high stress to the crypto industry, all the biggest developments, all the biggest applications were built on top of the Ethereum ecosystem, and the concentration of applications in the Ethereum ecosystem was very, very high. It was more than 75% overall of the overall total value locked. But after all this turmoil, people understood that we have to shift into other ecosystems. We have to diversify
protocols that we're building, and that's why right now the share of Ethereum in the total value locked of DeFi overall is actually declining, and it's around 60%, and it's continued to decline. And other ecosystems such as Solana, Phantom, Ton, and other are continuing to gain this dominance from Ethereum, as we can see. So what has really happened in DeFi summer in 2021? Of course, that was a boom of Ethereum ecosystem, although it was also a boom of DeFi 2.0 narrative. So by DeFi 2.0, what we actually want to say by that, we want to state that at this point, protocols decided not to incentivize traders and other providers to actually accumulate liquidity without owning it. It was the birth of the narrative of protocol-owned liquidity. It was a big change in overall DeFi landscape, led by Olympus DAO and numerous forks that arose after that, and a huge success, and especially the huge APIs that Olympus and other protocols were providing. After that, we also saw a really high level of adoption of stable coins. So basically, stable coins became the internal currency of transactions, trades, and reserve currencies in Web3. We've seen the rise of USDC, USDT, and decentralized versions of stable coins such as DAI. And there have been some experiments with algorithmic stablecoins, but we will dive into it in the next slide. And also, the final part of it, institutional players became really interested in Web3 and the blockchain space overall. They saw it as a diversification engine, as the source of additional opportunities and ways to actually capitalize on a future of technologies. And such big players as JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Fidelity, and other asset management firms were getting into the industry. But we can say that throughout other years, throughout 2024, this kind of adoption has increased exponentially. And basically, with the start of the adoption of Bitcoin ETFs and other ETFs, institutional players are just entering the whole market, and it's been shifting the liquidity levels a lot. And this is the event which is pretty important in the whole industry of crypto. So this is the biggest two fails of these protocols. The first one is a Terra, is a L1 blockchain developed by Terraform Labs, and the stablecoin, which is algorithmic. So just in case to know that so far the most prominent structures have been the over-collateralized stablecoins with real reserves, like USDT and USDC, for example. This one is centralized, and decentralized versions of over-collateralized stablecoins such as DAI. However, that was a big experiment with Terra and the algorithmic stablecoin USD, which was very huge at the time, and the whole blockchain reached the TVL more than $25 billion. At the time, it was a huge protocol, one of the most prominent at the time. And the thing with algorithmic stablecoins, and in exact case of UST, that UST was using Luna to absorb and to act as the arbitrage-driven algorithm in order to sustain the peg one-to-one to United States dollars. But due to the downfall happened on a curve when one user actually withdrew more than 2 billion of value and wanted to exchange it USD to Luna, it caused actually a crash in the peg mechanism. And over the next 2 days, a lot of users saw that depreciation, and they tried to exchange the Luna tokens and actually get out of the stablecoin, and that caused the hyperinflation of Luna, causing the emissions going up to trillions, and the whole mechanism actually crashed. And what was the result? 4 billion of value was just wiped out of the industry in a few days, and a lot of other protocols were very, very heavily influenced by that, because a lot of DeFi protocols were holding their reserves and treasuries nominated in UST, and a lot of users were holding the assets in UST, and that's why it was such a big fail to the whole industry. But the lessons were learned. Alongside with the next thing, what I wanted to emphasize is FTX. So FTX was the third largest centralized crypto exchange in more than 10 billion under assets, and it had huge partnerships with biggest stars, biggest companies in the world. It was supported by top VCs in the world. However, in November 2022, it collapsed due to the very weird intersection of Alameda Research was originally a trading firm in the exchange, and basically user deposits were just in paper. They were purely centralized, and initially the funds were used for pretty high risk profile operations by Alameda Research. It's a pretty long story, but the main thing is that after that, users realized, and crypto users realized, that narrative, not your keys, not your coins, were actually working, and that now it's time to shift to decentralized versions of crypto protocols to real decentralized DeFi. And also after that, a lot of big exchanges, they implemented the proof of reserves mechanism and all the transparency to the background operations, which is definitely a positive sign. But as you can see, it caused a lot of people losing the funds, and it caused the industry to actually go quiet for a while and brought a lot of negative sentiments, which actually slowed down the industry growth, but it also brought a lot of useful insights. And to more current things which are happening in industry, right now we can see that from EVM chains, there's a big migration of liquidity and user base and applications and developers to such chains as Solana, and we can call it the emerging leader of Web3. So first of all, because Solana is currently a home for very successful applications which are actually generating revenue. So more than 1.2 billion was generated as a network revenue in Q1 2025. And we can also see the improvement in application revenue capture ratio. And this means that the maturity of that protocols is getting higher. And these protocols are not just generating the transactional volumes, they can actually capture that transaction volume and transfer it to revenue, which is a very positive metric. Also, the stablecoin market cap is constantly growing on Solana. And the main drivers of Solana blockchain, to my opinion, to a lot of research that been done previously, is speculation driven. However, the network is able to sustain that speculation driven demand. So let's say the biggest trading volumes that we can see on Solana based decentralized exchanges happened throughout the launch of the Trump token. And also the biggest inflow into the DeFi ecosystem, which is pretty rich in Solana, was also happening due to the meme coin craze. So a lot of assets which are not really backed by anything than just purely narrative entertainment value. But all this actually sparked a huge interest to Solana blockchain, and now we can see a lot of really smart so-called protocols getting built on this chain, and leaders being Camino with 24% in a market share, Jupiter and Radium basically being the decentralized exchanges on Solana. And of course, you may have heard about Pump Fund, the meme pad, basically a launch pad for meme tokens with staggering revenue amounts generated so far. And going in the future and looking in the future, what kind of emerging leaders we can see alongside the Solana blockchain. So we can also see the real world applications getting richer and richer, and a lot of institutional players looking into tokenization, especially, so stable coins is leading, so cash tokenization leading the pack. However, we can also see that private credit and treasury debt is also being heavily tokenized. And in the back, and one of the most promising categories is also real estate tokenization and art tokenization. And basically everything in the world can be tokenized, and this narrative is getting bigger and bigger, and a lot of institutional players like banks, Qatar National Bank recently announced a tokenized money market fund just recently, and a lot of announcements happening over this time. So the second thing I want to emphasize is layer 2 network expansion. A lot of Web3 natives can call it pretty irritating thing, because right now you can almost find a layer 2 solution for everything. There have been a lot of layer 2 networks which emerged, but throughout all this, layer 2 craze, we can also see that a lot of protocols are choosing multi-chain throughout the middle layer, such as layer 0, wormhole, and protocols launching on different chains and deploying the solutions on different chains simultaneously, thanks to the developing infrastructure. And by revenue leading blockchain cases, right now we can see the stable coins, of course, like Tether and Circle being the companies that actually are managing the emissions of centralized stablecoins such as USDT and USDC. They're capitalizing the most on the current markets. DEXs and trading terminals, due to the success of transaction-based revenue models, are also being top 2 in revenue leading blockchain cases. Of course, the L1 blockchains, such as the backbone and fundamental case for all the ecosystem apps that's getting built, L1 blockchains also stay in the top 3. And liquid staking and lending protocols capitalizing on APIs. Usually they take the percentage of the API created. Also are in the later pack of revenue leading protocols. So now, after we have gone through a lot of narratives and things happening in the industry, we can go into what it really takes and what kind of choices do you have when you launch your product. And the most fundamental decision that you take is actually on what chain and what platform to launch. And the first thing that comes to mind is Ethereum as being the most prominent blockchain with the maximum security. However, the current throughput and transaction per second parameters, as well as the really high cost per transaction, can identify that it's probably not the best way to launch a product if you just want to do it exactly on a layer 1. You instead can focus on launching your product on specific layer 2 solutions. And right now there are a lot of, based on your use case, so whether you want to launch a gaming application or decentralized finance application, you can choose which kind of layer 2 solution fits you the best. However, if you want to expand outside the EVM ecosystem, there are a lot of choice opportunities. We'll expand on Solana and Tone, for example, in the next slide. However, as I mentioned previously, there is also opportunity to launch and deploy your Web3 solution on several chains simultaneously, or tens chains simultaneously. And with protocols such as Layer 0 and Wormhole, for example, you can do that, as well as expanding your on-chain capabilities with Layer 3 solutions. So basically building on top of Layer 2 and specific applications such as orbs being one of the most prominent solutions for on-chain trading, let's say. You can integrate Layer 3 solution in your DEX and have a new types of orders and expand the speed and cut off the transaction costs and so on. So out of all that, I've given you the options, but what are the main criteria which you can use in order to define what option is the best for you? So of course, you can look into the ecosystem maturity and developer experience, because you don't want to launch in an ecosystem which is not that active in terms of community members and active holders and active wallets, which are happening in this ecosystem, as well as developer expertise. If you're planning to develop a technical solution, you'll need a lot of things which are already been developed in this ecosystem. So you need developer tooling, you need a lot of patterns that's been tested in the ecosystem. So it's a pretty important factor. Of course, performance and security is also pretty evident. Usually transaction per second is the main criteria, especially if you're looking to launch a high frequency application like GameFi, because a lot of in-game transactions happening, and you don't need really high fees that will actually create a lot of friction and not let users transact within your ecosystem. And composability is pretty important. So if you want the maximum composability for your application, so by composability, I mean, in this case, is opportunities to integrate your application with a general DeFi application. So let's say if you're building a tokenization project or looking to tokenize some kind of real world assets, and then you want to create the whole economy on top of it, so users can put your asset that they have tokenized into the pool in order to borrow or lend against it, or use it as a collateral, or use it overall in DeFi economy. Composability is a main factor, and EVM chains being the best choice in this term, because the ecosystem has maximum maturity. But overall, if you look into Solana, right now there are a lot of lending, borrowing ecosystem and applications in Solana right now. Or you can look into specific protocols such as Plume, being the L1 network for RWA projects specifically. So your decision-making process can look like this. You can analyze throughout these parameters and choose what works the best for you. And the final point, which is not the list of importance, we can see is compliance, of course. So, for example, while working with some of our clients previously, the technological choice, so the platform and the stack that they has put into production was pretty influenced by the compliance considerations, because they were launching in one of the jurisdiction in Latin America, and by one of these countries there was a recommendation, and a compliance framework of this country was a recommendation to launch specifically on Bitcoin native network, especially in Bitcoin layer 2. And by this decision, because basically they have identified the technological stack, so you don't have to avoid looking to compliant frameworks. Sometimes it can be pretty hard and pretty complex to identify, but you have to comply with the framework of the country or region you're launching into, because it can really influence a lot of decisions which is going to be happening on architecture phase. Passing through architecture phase, exactly. Now we can notice that although Web3 is pretty nascent space in terms of development and infrastructure, there are a lot of already pretty well developed frameworks and patterns that builders can use in order to make the application work. So in terms of smart contract architecture, you can go into escrow contracts for conditional payments. If you're building a decentralized exchange as well, there are a lot of patterns. There are a lot of patterns for lending protocols and specifically token infrastructure. And when you're choosing between the EVM and non-EVM, there are a lot of things that you can take into the comparison. So you can take the tooling, you can take the basically the timeline of development, the difference between the programming stack you can use. And on the right side, for example, you can see the architecture pattern of the MakerDAO, which is now Sky, one of the leading Web3 protocols right now on stablecoin. And the things which are now pretty new with Tone ecosystem, and throughout the last year specifically, we've seen the huge rise of native Tone application and Jet Tone token standards specifically. So if you're building on Tone, you should take into consideration that there are a lot less developers than Ethereum. So Ethereum is the richest developer community. However, if you're building applications such as Telegram bot or Telegram mini app, and the application which will have the interaction with a Telegram messenger, you should definitely consider this stack because this is the most relevant one. And the second thing that you're going to consider if you're going to be launching different kind of assets in your ecosystem, it can be non-fungible tokens, it can be fungible tokens. So regarding the non-fungible tokens, they are not repeatable. So basically, when you want to have a trade of ownership or specific rights to the thing that you tokenize, or you want to attribute royalties to the asset, you should definitely look into non-fungible tokens. Right now, the narrative for NFTs are not that hot as it was previously. And now I would suggest launching an NFT only if you need it from the technological standpoint. If you don't want to confirm the specific rights or specific ownership attributes to the asset you're doing in your ecosystem or using in a protocol, then it is a way. But if you're just launching NFT in order to, as you go to market strategy or you want to run an NFT sale, it most likely won't be that high demand for that kind of assets. However, the next tool, which is way more multivariable, and there are a lot of things that are taken into account, is fungible token. So with fungible token is basically the currency, and you can see a lot of tokens right now, and a lot of tokens being emitted every month, and a lot of protocols using fungible tokens as a way to actually incentivize usage of the protocol, also to fundraise, to provide governance for the protocol, to provide rewards for the community to bootstrap the network effect, basically in the growth of the network, especially if they're marketplace and two-sided system. They want to both incentivize the buyers and sellers to come to the system and transact. So tokens being pretty effective tool in order to execute that strategies. And airdrops being a pretty popular way to distribute tokens to your loyal audience. However, over the time, airdrops have proved that it's not the maximum efficiency to distribute tokens to Web3 communities if you don't have a specific strategy and specific math calculated previously. Because there are a lot of so-called users which capitalize on the value of airdrops. They're called Sybils in the Web3 community. So specifically, the users that have multiple accounts and a special software that capitalize on our airdrop and token rewards. So you have to be very, very careful when you're launching such campaigns nowadays. And regarding the technological choice and the final considerations, now you can see that Solidity is still a very, very prominent stack and the smart contract language. However, Rust, being the primary stack for Solana development, and Bitcoin script are gaining some popularity. So the Rust can be associated with the rise and huge popularity of Solana. And Bitcoin script, basically the rise of a Bitcoin ecosystem, especially the Bitcoin layer 2, the NFTs on top of Bitcoin ordinals, and other things which are happening. Basically, the main goal of the Bitcoin ecosystem, which is now being developed on top of layer 1, the main Bitcoin blockchain, is actually to capitalize on this liquidity, which has been locked for ages, basically since the Bitcoin initiation and the origin. And now you can basically use this liquidity. You can use Bitcoin in a lot of DeFi operations, such as lending and borrowing, thanks to that protocols that are rising. And that's why the popularity of Bitcoin script is also on the rise. And we can see and we can predict that the popularity of that languages will continue to rise, and the Solidity will decline based on the change of the dominance of that chains. And the final considerations that are important when you choose your technology stack is basically what kind of design decisions you can implement for your protocols to be adopted faster. So if you're focusing primarily on non-crypto users, if you want your application to be used by people who have never interacted with Web3, it can actually create a lot of friction if you want to put the first action that they do is to connect the wallet or transact on the centralized exchange, or because it's pretty complex and it requires a lot of actions, it requires a lot of specific knowledge. And the thing that can solve that problem is account abstraction, because primarily if you are iterating with the Web3 stack, you're doing that through externally owned accounts. And if you're implementing the account abstraction, you can actually achieve such things as gasless transactions, because you can compensate it for users. You can also achieve such features as social logins, especially when, say, you launch an application and you want the user not even to know that is a blockchain-based application, just to have a social profile, the email, or social media, and just to log in this application and interact with your game, with your app or financial app. It doesn't matter what kind of narrative you're building in. And account abstraction is basically abstracting the crypto layer and bringing a very familiar to traditional users in terms of technologies and making onboarding very, very easy. The legal framework, we partially have covered that in the previous slide, and upgradability and storage. So basically, regarding the storage, you have two main design choices, whether to put it on centralized rails or decentralized. And with upgradability, you can make it your smart contract upgradable, or you can have unconstrained or constrained upgradability. So usually to the experience that we had previously, when you're doing it with upgradability, there are a lot of patterns that has arisen throughout the time. And of course, it's impossible to design a protocol which can stay unupgradable for a very, very long time, right? Because a lot of things happening, you have to pivot sometimes, you have to change the features, you have to iterate based on the user feedback. And that's why constrained upgradability being the best design choice that you can take. And try to avoid the proxies in order to maintain the user trust. In this case, it's a pretty extended topic, just to set the mark that constraint upgradability can be the best choice for your applications. So you can integrate the upgrades in your smart contract architecture without actually influencing the storage, basically abstracting these two layers. And sometimes, in some cases, when you're building a protocol which is community-based, it's really popular to have a DAO structure. So basically the voting rights for users and the protocol decision makers to influence the decisions and upgrade the smart contracts based on the community votes. Of course, it should be controlled and managed. Now, after the technical part, we can actually dive into the business models in a blockchain phase. And I can say that there are a lot of similarities to traditional business models. And the first business model that I want to mention is user-based. You've seen the user-based revenue models and such applications as Figma, for example. It's a non-crypto application, which is pretty successful, and you can add more users. And Figma, it's called seats. Basically, by adding seats, you're increasing your cost, but also you're adding the users that can use the application. So user-based being the one model. The second one, the usage-based. So we've seen that a lot in cloud storage providers such as Azure and AWS. So it's primarily consumptive. The more you use, the more compute you consume, the more you pay. It's pretty straightforward. However, there are some more, let's say, peculiar and more advanced models. Usually, they are applicable in B2B sector, in Web3, such as value-based, and its traditional example is being the Palantir and military intelligence. So basically, the value-based model is grounded in a very effective communication of the value that you can deliver to your clients, to your customers. And based on the value, let's say if you're building an AI application that can cut the cost of the sales department of the company by 20%, and you actually know the sales spent for this company, so you can actually quantitatively derive this 20%, and you can price based on the value you create. So your price can be derived as a percentage of the value that you actually create for a company. It's a bit more sophisticated, but it can also be effectively used. Transaction-based model is one of the most prominent in Web3. You can notice in a lot of decentralized exchanges, lending protocols that basically can take a cut of the transaction happening on the platform. And the most famous examples in traditional industries can be Stripe and the payment APIs. So basically, when they integrated, they take a cut of every transactions which is happening in the business. And as you know, it has turned out to be pretty successful. Stripe is a huge company now. However, there are some more Web3 specific revenue models, such as protocol-owned liquidity model and token models, and token economics models, actually, to be more straightforward. So with token economics models, basically, companies can take the revenue in tokens, or they can take the revenue as the yield on top of the liquidity pool that they maintain. So as mentioned, one of the first slides, the protocol-owned liquidity model arose during the DeFi summer 2021, particularly driven by Olympus DAO. So basically, when DeFi protocols are holding the liquidity and they own it, and they capitalize on the growth of this liquidity and utilization of these funds. There's been one model, and the token economics model is basically the utilization of the native token of the protocol in terms to generate revenue. Not primarily sell, but there are also a lot of options such as staking and providing liquidity, for example. And after you have defined your business model, you can think of how, especially you can go to market, how you can launch. And there are many things to consider. So first of all, to emphasize that in Web2, you have pretty understandable mechanics. You have paid marketing, you have SEO, you have digital advertising, you have sponsorships, and many other things which are pretty familiar to most of you. However, in blockchain, when you're going to market, you have to efficiently combine these levers with the new ones, being exclusively for Web3. So in Web3, you have a lot of tools which you can track the efficiency. You can airdrop tokens to the early community that you have, so you can increase the incentive to participate in your testnet. for example, you can allow early access, you can mint soul-bound tokens for such users, or you can give away NFTs. You can launch quests to propel the activity of your community and incentivize them to try specific features. But also you have to combine it with a Web2. So for example, you want to grow your socials, but at the same time you can airdrop tokens, and you can combine this so you can create the most efficient strategy. And how you can actually measure it. So now on the slide you can see basically the comparison with traditional metrics and Web3 metrics. So customer acquisition cost in Web3 is basically the efficiency of your token incentives. Let's say if you give away 1 million in tokens, and you want your customer acquisition cost to be measured also in tokens, and you want to have the positive ROI. So instead of traditional currency and fiat currencies that you spend on advertisement, on marketing materials and development, you can measure your tokens where you spend on different incentives. You can measure the token spent on airdrops. You can measure the token spent on quests, or tokens being given out to your community as staking APIs. So regarding the lifetime value, in Web3, you can measure it as the contribution to the total value locked, or the duration of the deposits of average staking duration. So for how many days your users are actually using your protocol or depositing money to your DeFi solution. And with conversions and retention, you can facilitate the on-chain data, because as you know, the blockchain is a transparent database, and you can track through a lot of different metrics, which allows you to analyze the whole economic journey of your user and your customers. In Web3, you can see what kind of balances they have, what kind of tokens do they hold, what kind of the actions they perform, and how long they have interacted with other Web3 protocols before joining yours, and so on. So, which is pretty insightful. And by combining the on-chain data with off-chain, you can actually get the maximum exposure. And as you can see in the slide, of course, this presentation will be shared, so you can dive into it. There are a lot of tools already available, both for community growth, for ad networks in Web3, CRMs, and on-chain analytics tools and community tools as well. And just the final mark on the whole go-to-market journey is, so first of all, if you're launching a product-led, you focus on signups, and you focus on the actions that can actually be completed by users. And one of the examples is WorldCoin by Sam Altman, the founder of OpenAI. So basically, their action is to get the verification with the special devices, right? So this is the key action. However, a lot of B2B driven protocols and companies and Web3, they are sales led. And as example, you can see the Alchemy, basically Web3 tooling. Their motion is purely sales led, because the sales team is driving all the actions. They have demo, they have partnerships, they have hands-on approach to increase the exposure to the product. And a lot of blockchain ecosystems, primarily as examples, now you can see Solana, Aptos, Optimism. The key stakeholders are developers, and that's why the most important motion here is to gain the maximum effect to developers and attract developers into your product, and enhance and encourage them to be active. Because the more active are developers in your ecosystem, if you're building a blockchain, for example, layer 1 or layer 2 solution, the more popular and more usability you will gain, and the more exposure you can get for your product. And the last two are community-based and channel partners. So community-based are primarily customer-focused products. As you can see here, social protocols is for customer. And the most efficient channel to engage such people through social channels, through community building. And the last one is purely for B2B. You develop the channel strategies, you gain partnerships, integrations with DeFi protocols, and throughout that partnerships, you basically achieve the maximum exposure for your product. So that's been the final part. We have gone through the narratives, we have gone through the technological choices, we've gone to GTM motions and Web3 specific tools. Now we can see that Web3 industry has gone through different stages, through ups and downs, through exciting rises and pretty brutal falls, like in 2022. But right now, we see a renaissance of a DeFi, and we see a renaissance of Web3 in new applications, and new people who actually understand the value of technology and go beyond the speculation-driven narratives. And just as a final remark, I'll mention that there's a huge shift from Solana. So previously it was a huge shift from EVM-based blockchains to Solana ecosystem. Now it's happening to newer blockchains, and throughout that kind of new leaders, I can point out Monad, Mega ETH, and Baron Chain, and probably Base as well as the most active players right now. Also, users are beginning to identify that the most sustainable solutions are actually the ones who have already found the product market fit in Web3 and are leaning towards the revenue first approaches. We're actually prioritizing features, prioritizing the users, and not necessarily launching the tokens first. First, they achieve the usability, the value, and then actually you can launch some tokens and capitalize on the popularity. And also, the topic which was touched upon is institutional adoption is driving a lot of things in Web3, bringing a lot of fresh new liquidity and trust, I would say. And now a lot of institutional players, companies, asset management funds have access to all things Web3 and a lot of solutions now being developed which can allow them to participate in decentralized economy. So thank you so much for your attention. Right now we have the QR codes which will allow you to share your feedback and get in touch with us if you have any questions. And of course, feel free to follow us on socials.